Not live.
Hi, welcome. I'm Ivory. This is Roz, and this is the Sedona Soul Sisters show. Today's topic is Angelic Rescue. Before we get into that, we want to say hello to our listeners in Bergen, Norway. Thank you for tuning in. We see you. It's like one person tells another, and pretty soon you've got a whole group in Norway watching. So thank you for tuning in. This is a topic I'm very passionate about. Roz and I were just talking a little bit about both of us have had experiences and saying probably most people have been rescued in some way by an angel and don't even know it, don't even attribute it to that. And it can be physically rescued. It could be emotionally, like I know people who've been on the verge of suicide who actually even tried suicide and it didn't work because their angels intervened. It wasn't their time. Spiritual, rescued spiritually, when you feel like God has abandoned you and you've lost your connection and all this. So there's many different ways to be saved. What's your thought on that, Roz?
I think, most people, if you look back on the course of your life, you'll find these little, sometimes they seem insignificant at the time, but these little interventions are going on all along. And they're definitely angelic interventions with the course of our lives. So you gotta like get a picture of the level of protection and guidance that you actually have.
I agree. And sometimes like things will happen and you don't even realize till later what it was. And the first one I think of for me was when I was 5 and my family and I were camping in the Appalachians. And I asked my mom if I could go for a walk. She said, yes, just don't cross any streets. And even then I was really literal. So I didn't cross any streets. And then pretty soon I'm way far away from the campground and it's getting dark and it's raining and I'm standing on the side of this road and there's no traffic and I'm just crying, standing in the rain, and a vehicle pulls up and it's a man in a station wagon. And I had been trained, you don't get in a car with a stranger. But he opened the back seat and he had a dog in the back. Now, I know that's going to set off alarm bells for a lot of people. They're like, oh, it's a pedophile. He's got a dog in the back seat to lure you in. I was so happy to see that dog, but there was a golden light around all of it, around him, the car, the dog. I feel the angels coming in as I tell you this. And I knew it was okay. I just knew it was all right. I got in the back seat. I was petting the dog and he took me. All I knew was I was in a blue tent, but it was pretty easy to find because it was the place where all the state troopers were and a whole crowd of people organizing to go on a search. So he brought me right back to my tent and everything was okay. No more walks that trip. But I realized later, like as a child, I didn't think about it, but I recognized that light and I knew what it was. And even in a time where I was really scared, lost, alone, I recognized that angelic light. And I just didn't even think about it at the time. I just got in the car. I know my mom had a cow later. You got in the car with a strange man? I'm like, well, I was lost. So yes.
I'm sure your mother was just like, ah.
She was frantic and I was I was shocked to see so many people there. But 5-year-olds don't think about the logistics of things.
Nope, not too much.
Many alternatives have occurred to me as an adult, but as a 5-year-old, no, it did not. So what happened to you in life that you think might have been an angelic intervention or rescue?
Well, I can remember, like I said, they seemed kind of insignificant at the time, but things in my childhood, I can remember I wasn't allowed to go and experience other people's homes too much, mainly because I had so many severe allergies and I could literally walk into a place, a situation, a cloud of dust for Pete's sake, and go into all kinds of respiratory distress issues. So I was on a pretty tight rein. But I remember one day being allowed to go after school to a friend's home. And it was where I lived, it was in an area of San Diego where there was a deep canyon in front of our home. And I lived only like a block and a half from the elementary school. So the walk to her house was not very far. And we started out after school. And I can remember her saying, here's my shortcut, let's go down through this canyon. And I had been cautioned and had it knocked in my head many times. My mom knocking on the door there, hey, don't do this, because of mainly the allergy issue. And I had a lot of respiratory duress with different kinds of grasses and pollens and all that stuff. So I knew to stay on the concrete sidewalk. And I can just remember having this feeling. And I always get this certain sensation when things are not going to go well. And I knew immediately, she was really working on me to go down through this canyon. And I just knew immediately, you're going to get down there and you're not going to be able to breathe. So I know that sounds so insignificant, but I know that was my angels going, don't go there. And that feeling, like you're talking about seeing a light, the feeling that I have is extremely, almost, I would describe it as the knowing, the clairsentience of like, this is not going to be a good deal. Don't do this. And I think when we have that sort of ability, sometimes, we're just not thinking and we're not in that modality of where we're thinking. But I feel like for those of you who experience that sensation, that is definitely your angels and your guides going, wait a minute, whoa, don't take this path, don't do this thing, whatever it is. So I pretty much found like that was one particular situation, but I pretty much found on the whole, if I listen to that, it really, that guidance is always there.
Oh, yeah.
Sensation, so it's a really good thing to become aware of that. And I feel like people are desensitized to that now. We all have it. It's there. We just have to become aware. And in my case, the becoming aware usually was something exactly like that, where I had to tune in and realize, no, you better follow what you've been told and follow guidance on this, even though it wasn't conscious thinking.
And I'm sure that girl was putting some pressure on you to have a little adventure. Let's take that shortcut.
Oh yes. We were about in 3rd or 4th grade, so
Peer pressure's tough.
it is.
The thing that stands out for me, like it always comes to my mind first, I should say, when I think about being rescued, being saved by angels, is the story of when I was 16 and my parents were I think they were even out of the country on a trip. And my dad said, do not drive his truck. And I was in charge of the 4 younger siblings. And so what did I do? I got invited. I was 16. I got invited to a party. So I thought, well, I'm in charge of all these kids. I'll take them with me. So I had some up in the cab of the truck with my boyfriend and one of his brothers, bunch of kids in the back of the truck. And this was in Prescott, Arizona. And back then there was a lot more dirt roads. So it was in Government Canyon. If you're in Prescott, you know what I'm talking about. This was in the 70s. And I'm trying to follow this vehicle, and I'd never been up in Government Canyon before. And so I was trying really hard to stay behind him. And we were kind of going around these dirt roads, and it was very windy with big drop-offs on the side, and I was nervous, but I was afraid I was going to lose this vehicle. Oh, heaven forbid the 16-year-old should miss a party. So I gunned it to catch up with them, and the wheels on the right side of the truck slid off the dirt road. And I knew there was like at least 100-foot drop off to the right. And my heart just kind of stopped. And I literally thought I just killed everyone. I just killed them all. And then right then, like the whole cab of the truck, like just filled with angelic light. And it was white and it was bright. And I could feel them like surrounding us. And it was almost like being in this calm bubble. And with no explanation, I mean, physics would say you got a heavy truck full of people, the right side wheels go off the road, you're going to tip to the right and go over. But what happened was the whole truck lifted up and suddenly we're rocketing off to the left. And there happened to be a road right there that went up, so it helped stop us, and we hit a rock and it cracked the bug guard on my dad's truck. That was the only damage. And I just sat there. I remember sitting there shaking. And I just went home. I didn't even feel like going to a party after that. It's like I came way too close to killing so many people I love. So, of course, later I confessed to my dad, my mom. And of course, they knew I had driven it because the bug guard was cracked. They just wondered when I would confess this. But that really stayed with me. You know, when people tease me and my family about that I drive slow, they mean I drive the speed limit. And one of the reasons I do is that experience. Like it terrified me, you know, and I'm so grateful that the angels lifted everybody up and, you know, we made it. But is very much leaves an impression upon you to have something like that happen.
I think that impression and that sense that, you know, we get, if you could have kind of like a mind meld with that. I mean, that's really your subconscious mind, your intuitive mind, and your inner spirit, you know, reaching connection with your guidance. And we're so mind controlled nowadays, you know, by television, by all the influences of the culture, that we've kind of lost connection. We've lost that sense that we get when we are being reached out to by our angels. So I would encourage people to really give some thought to things that have happened in your life and replay those events so you can find that angelic connection, because it's almost always there.
I'm sure this episode will have people thinking. It seems like every time I do an episode on my podcast about angels, and it's about intervention, angelic rescue, like people start going, oh my gosh, I had a similar experience and I never even thought that was an angel, or I wondered if it was an angel. Another thing I think about, I don't want to miss one. Oh yeah. So I was young. I was in my 20s and I was in an abusive marriage, and I had a young child, and he had moved us out of state, away from all my family. I had no vehicle. He took the only vehicle during the day. So I was kind of stuck there, and I was feeling just hopeless. And I got so upset one day, I just left, and I remember I was wearing this outfit my mom made me. There was this beautiful ivory, like a peplum jacket with a peplum and a matching skirt, and I had hosiery and heels on. And I'm in Colorado near Fruita, and I'm walking on the Colorado National Monument, and this is my favorite place to go walking, and I'm just moving fast, and it's getting drizzly. And all of a sudden, the ground to the right crumbled under my foot, and I'm dangling off the edge of a cliff in that white dress, that hot white dress. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to die in a fit of anger. I'm going to die because I went out walking here in heels in the rain on a drizzly day. And I'm hanging on to a root. That's all I had. I remember hanging onto that root. My hands were filthy. I still can see it. And Then all of a sudden I'm standing on the path again and I can see where the ground crumbled. I can see that happen. It wasn't my imagination. I'm filthy from falling down and sliding up against the muddy side of that drop off, but I'm just standing in the path. So I just was bewildered. I'm like, now I know that's my angels. I know they just lifted me up, and all they said was, it's not your time. So I just went home. What are you going to do? You were saved from falling off a cliff, so you go home. It was interesting. That was my first really understanding that you aren't going to cross if it's not your time. There were other things that happened as well, but that was my first eye opener to your angels want you, especially if you're a light worker. And I know a lot of you who follow our show you're here because you have a mission. You're here because you're supposed to help people. Then they don't want you to exit early. They want you to stay, get strong, get out of that negative situation, which I did get out of that situation, and find your path to where you're supposed to be. And, I'm grateful to them for saving me from a terrible death. I think that would have been horrible. I think that's why I don't like heights so much. No roller coasters, no downhill skiing for this girl.
Yeah, that would be a pretty shocking wake-up call, to have yourself in that situation and be literally removed from it by no real means of your own. So, and
it
that's
was in a split second.
Yeah, and I think that's another really important part to, process. I can remember when I was about 20 and I was driving my car and I was going to the gym, and I decided to kind of take the side streets. So I was coming down these streets where there were not stop signs going my direction, but only yield signs. The cross streets had stop signs in their directions. And I was driving up to this blind corner because, this was a residential area, so there were houses. And I suddenly got that feeling, like stop. And I put on the brakes. And here's some guy, just coming at a high rate of speed down this street, never slows down at the stop sign. And, I think the speed limit was residential, so maybe 20, 25. This guy was probably going 50 or 60. And he would have, literally plowed into me. And he was in a pretty large vehicle. Remember those old cars from the 60s? Those giant cars with the big V8 in there. He was driving one of those. And I knew immediately that, because I heard the voice say, stop. And I think, that's the other thing is we don't think that we hear necessarily always what's being directed at us from our angels, but I think it's like it's telepathic. So we are hearing it. We're not hearing it through our ear, but we're still getting the message. And realizing that is really important so that you're staying on top of how your angels are attempting to help you.
I had that. Oh my gosh. I was in Payson. I used to sing there used to be a show called the Arizona Celtic Women. And I sang a lot of duos and trios with a group called Cinnamon Twist. And those of you who are in Payson know them, Anne and Jen. And so I was there rehearsing with them, and we rehearsed pretty late. And I was driving back, and Payson is in the woods. It's up in the mountains. It's in the woods. And I had to get back to Sedona. So I'm driving through these woods, and I was just going the speed limit. Remember my story from the truck? But I heard in my head, slow down. And I actually slowed way down. And as I went around the corner to the right, a huge elk, a male elk, was standing in my lane. And if you haven't seen a full-grown elk, they will mess you and your vehicle up really good. And I wouldn't want to hit an animal either. So I just stopped, and it wasn't moving. Even when it saw my car and the headlights were on, it just stood there for a while. And I knew my angels had warned me, because otherwise I would have gone around that curve at 50, 55 miles an hour and hit that poor elk and probably totaled my car, if not gotten killed. So that's, I think, a great example too of that, how you hear it in your head. Like I heard, slow down. And I knew it was my angels. I'm like, I don't ask why, just do it. And that's why.
Lots of adventures out there in the world that I think our angels are actually helping us with all the time. We just have to become conscious of that.
Another way they help us that I think is important to talk about is how they rescue you before you get into the situation. Like they have told me not to get involved with a certain man, and I didn't see any warning signs. I didn't want to, and I didn't want to listen to that. And I ended up in horrendous situations a couple times where just really abusive relationships. And my angels told me flat out, not that man, not that man. I heard it clearly in my head. So the last, I met Roz right after the second terrible relationship ended. And she knows how beaten down I was, because I just feel like I was like a shadow of myself. And my angels are the ones who showed me everything I needed to know to bring me to a point where I could get out of that, where I could wake up to the truth of it and admit the giant red flags that had been waving. Hello, Ivory. This is who I am.
The wake up call.
Yes. So sometimes it's not like physically rescuing you, but it's mentally telling you so you avoid a dark night of the soul. And I would have. If I'd listened to them, I would have avoided the two worst dark nights of my soul. And I would have rather not.
I wonder sometimes, though, I mean, we all come here, we have lessons in our life. And, the path of our life and how our life goes is determined by how we approach and manage those lessons. So even though, we look back and we think, I should have never been in that situation, I guess I'm like a Pollyanna, because I look at it and I go, but I learned this from that.
I don't think that's being a Pollyanna. I think that's necessary for spiritual and personal growth. Once you recover from whatever happened, to look at, what did I gain from this? And I was just saying the other day that what I gained was my career I have now. I would not have finally listened to my angels and stepped into this work full time with showing my face, using my actual name, if they hadn't intervened the way they did, and if I hadn't gone through that last relationship.
Well, I think, we look at those situations, and I totally agree with that. But I also look at it and I go, how much pain, how much pain and heartache do we have to get before we see the red flags that were coming up all along? And those angels are out there waving those flags. So it's more about our choices and how we choose to go on that path. So, I mean, we have free will. That's what I always go back to, is the fact that we do have free will. So when we make these choices and our angels are trying to rescue us, we have to be willing to cooperate with that too. So
I have to wonder if maybe sometimes, like for me, it took a 10-year terrible marriage and then an 8-year terrible relationship later. Maybe that's because maybe it took me that long and that intense and that much pain and suffering, because it's a lesson I could not make it through. I could not learn and work and grasp in previous lifetimes. And so I just chose a way that's going to be so powerful. I can't avoid learning the lesson this time around. I like to believe that's what it is, because and the angels are saying, yes, that's what it is, because sometimes we just can't learn something. We try lifetime after lifetime, and we keep pulling that same issue into the next lifetime. And I certainly don't want to do that again.
Yeah, I think that's you know, we get no guarantees about the lessons that were sent, but we do have some choice about, you know, how we walk that path and what involves us and what brings us to that point. And you know, in a lot of people's case, I mean, and I certainly see this in your case, I mean, you have a very sweet nature and you're very genuine. And I think, you know, along with that goes some naivete.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you always expect everyone to be good and wonderful.
I used to. I
Sometimes
don't
I
so
think,
much now. I'm not nearly as trusting and Pollyanna, that would be Pollyanna, as I used to be. And unfortunately, it's because of really painful, horrible experiences. But I tell people now, like, it's not safe to be that naive. It's not safe to be that trusting in this world. And we can't just trust until
absolutely.
someone gives us a reason not to. We need to trust little by little till they show us that we can trust them more. And that's what I've switched over to. Maybe sometimes not as trusting as I would like to be anymore. And I think maybe that's okay too.
I think it's okay. There's a good aspect to that. But the pain that brings you to that point would certainly be nice to avoid.
I do want to talk about one more thing that just sticks in my mind. And maybe because it'll be helpful for some of you listening, is that when I was in that last relationship and it was clear that this man had serious addiction and he was a con man, and I was just so much a habitual liar, just so much. And I had this part of me as a light worker that's like, I can help him. There's some light in there. I just know it. I can help him. I can help him embrace the light, and he can turn around and be the man he was meant to be. And I was sacrificing myself in the process. And so I kept asking my angels every day, please give me a clear sign of what I need to do, what I must do. 7 months went by. I asked morning and night. And then Roz knows the story. I woke in the middle of the night. I'm having just a very vivid dream that all my angels and guides, I'm in bed and propped up, and all my angels and guides are surrounding me. They're sitting on the bed. They're kneeling on the floor. They're holding my hands, one stroking my head, sending their angelic energy into me. And my master guide leaned forward and he said, you have to leave to save yourself. And it was clear as day. And I started crying, and I woke up and I was crying, and I could still feel the angelic energy around me. And I knew I got my clear answer. And I already knew that was the truth, but I needed to hear it from them at that time. And so I feel like in that way, they really did rescue me, because I needed that validation. I didn't have Roz in my life then. I didn't have really too many people at all who would have understood this situation. So in that way, like it just kind of woke me up, and it made me feel more calm that I'm not abandoning somebody. I'm saving myself from being pulled out of my light, from being pulled away from my mission, my life purpose. And I hope that if any of you listening are in a position like that, that helps you as well.
Well said.
Oh, it was an experience, all righty. Well, I have all these other stories to share with you. We'll have to do a part 2 sometime. I have a podcast called The Angel Room, and lots of people share their angel stories there. So I printed out some and just took all the names out of them, and we'll do another show. There's more. There's so much more. And if you have a story of being angelically rescued in any way, email it to us. That email is in the show description. I'll hang on to it for another episode of this, and we'll talk about this again. Any last thoughts, Roz?
Another book coming.
Another book. I know. You know what I want my next book to be, but I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be angels again. I've got angels on the brain.
In the brain.
In the brain, on the
And in
brain,
the
all
realm.
around me.
Yeah, in the realm, in the
Yesterday, I
oracle.
was a guest on another podcast, and before we even started, I saw a big angelic light go from right here, zoom across on my screen. I'm like, well, I guess the angels are happy I'm doing it. It was another angel podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for tuning in. We're just so happy to have you here. Next Friday's topic is spiritual well-being. So we'll find out what that means and how to achieve it. And in the meantime, we hope you have an enlightening week.